Thanks. Yeah, so React is backed by Facebook, and there is more. Have a bigger ecosystem, but so Vue.js is obviously newer, and it's not as I would say the ecosystem is not as large as React, but then there's a lot more officially supported libraries. So like in React, if you want to use router or anything, you kind of have to use third parties. It's not really officially by React, but Vue.js gives you a lot of officially supported like router, state management, and all that. So in terms of popularities, so React is obviously at the very top, but then Vue is very close at the second place if you look at the stars in GitHub. So this is from like a few months ago. I'm sure now they have more stars. But here is all the libraries that's officially supported by Vue.js. So there's router, there's Vuex for state management, there's CLI for project scaffolding, and a bunch of other stuff. But in React, mostly, I think the only officially supported library is React itself. It doesn't really have a router or scaffolding. You have to kind of use third-party stuff. So Vue.js gives you more complete package in terms of officially supported stuff. So let's dive into some code and let's see it in action. Let me close all my random stuff. w08d4. All right, so one of the things I use a lot when I do new projects is use project scaffolding. So there's something called Vue CLI. So if we go into it, make this a bit bigger. So this is basically their command line interface for you to generate a new project, like Rails. You can just type in some command, and it will generate the project for you. So here, if I go into this project, here I see status is RC. What does that mean? Well, you see there's not much stuff going on in this documentation, which looks kind of weird. And it says status RC. Any idea? What does RC mean? Core feature are ready, and API is not considered stable. There are still a few small bugs, but the CLI is now ready for non-mission critical use cases. Oh, that doesn't sound so good. It's ready for non-mission critical uses. That means it's not ready for mission critical uses, right? It says this branch is for 3.0. Okay, so RC basically means release candidate. So meaning this is a new version, and it is now at the state where they're probably going to release it, but it's not the final version yet. If you ever see this in the documentation of a library, you should probably not use this library for production stuff. Like if you were building a project for a client or for your company, you probably don't want to use that. But how do I change? So here it says 3.0. Well, then I guess there's probably a 2.0 that is ready for production use. Then how do I switch to the 2.0 branch? Change branch, yeah. Or you can actually change tags. So most of the libraries on GitHub should have the version probably tagged. So if you look at here, right, there's a bunch of 3.0, RC123, and then there's betas, and if we scroll way to the bottom, there's 2.9.3 that doesn't have RC or beta. So let's go to that. Right, then here we can see, oh, there's a lot more documentation now. So that feels better. So let's look at this. So nowhere does it say it's beta or RC, so that means it's probably ready for production use. So installation, pretty straightforward, and can skip that. And there's Vue init template project name. Okay, so let's use that to generate our project. Okay, so I'm just going to type in that. And basically what it does is that it asks you a few questions. What's your project name? What's your description? And what kind of package you want to use? Do you want to use the router? Let's say yes.
Tiny app open. See how you're in Tiny app folder.
Oh yeah, I don't want to do that in my Tiny app folder. Well, actually that's fine. I just want to show you guys how it looks like. Actually no. Let me jump back. Okay, I've asked you a bunch of questions. Do you want lint? No. And then you ask you whether you want to install. So I'm going to say no. But if you choose yes, it's going to do the npm install for you, and then you can run your server. Okay? And then you can see it generates a my project folder inside there. Okay? And if we go into the project, you can see all the files generated. But I'm going to delete this because it already generated tiny app because the npm install takes some time to run. Okay, so tiny app is the app I generated yesterday night. I already did npm install, so let's look at the package.json and see what it includes. So if we look at the dependencies, make this bigger. Look at the dependency, there's just view and view router, okay? Because we choose yes for the router, that's what you get. And there's a bunch of dev dependencies, which is, you don't need to worry too much about it, because we use Webpack. And by the way, do you guys know what Webpack is? Kind of? What does it do? A pack of everything you need. Yes, I would say that's correct. But if you don't use it, what happens? Why do we need a Webpack? Like, what's its purpose? No? You have to require everything into one file. Well, I guess you don't have to. I mean, it is better practice to have everything in one file. But Webpack actually does a lot of things. Like if you're writing React and you're writing JSX, know that your browser doesn't actually understand JSX, right? Do you guys know that? JSX doesn't run on your browser. So JSX actually have to get turned into JavaScript or HTML and CSS in order to be able to run on your browser, right? So Webpack, one of the reasons to use Webpack is that it has a bunch of plugins that help you translate JSX to plain JavaScript so that your browser can run. And other things is that it can bundle all your, you have different JavaScript files, right? You can bundle them into one, make it smaller, so kind of minify it so that it runs faster on your, so you download faster on your browser. Babel as in minifying?
Babel is what translates.
Oh yeah, well Babel, you kind of have to use part of, I think there's a Babel Webpack plugin or something like that, but you use it together with Webpack, I think. I'm not 100% sure. You just use the loader?
We've been using the Babel loader within Webpack.
Oh yeah, within Webpack. So Webpack is kind of like a framework, a library that you can use a bunch of plugins and then run your file through each plugin and then finally produce the final result you want. That runs on the browser.
Using Webpack the entire time, but using Babel as the one that's translating within Webpack?
Yeah. So you can use Babel, and then afterwards you can use Minify, which minifies your file, and you can have other stuff that can combine them into one file, and then a bunch of basically a bunch of processes that you want to process before you actually compile the JavaScript to the version where the browser can run, basically. So that's kind of the general idea of it. But there's so many plugins you can use. So it does different things based on what plugin you use. You have a question, or?
Is company use Webpack a lot, or just React itself?
Well, yes, company usually use Webpack. There's other alternative to Webpack, but the end goal is when you want to go to production, you can't really run your, the source code you write, right? You first have to make it runnable in browser, and second, you want to make it a single file and make it as small as possible. That way, the browser can download it faster. Do you guys know what minifying is?
Isn't that within Webpack as well?
Yeah, it's within Webpack, but the purpose of minifying is to switch. Usually, you name your variable the name will be something that makes sense, right? But more characters in your variable name actually means more download time for your browser to download the file, right? More character means larger files. And you want your file to be as small as possible because the browser has to download it all before running it, right? So minifying is basically they change all your variable names to just single letters and then make everything in one line. Or if you look at, for example, GitHub, if you look at their JavaScript files, let's take a look here. Go to network and let's refresh this. See, there's their JavaScript file. Oh, they didn't even minify it. Weird. Or they kind of. Well, if you look at their variable name, it's all F, M, G, Y, B, right? And the things that doesn't make any sense. That's because they when they wrote it, they obviously used variable name to make sense. But then they use a processor that minifies it, make it all, it still works the same way, but then make the file smaller. And that's basically minifying the file. And in most production websites, you should be minifying your JavaScript in order to deploy. Okay, so that's a bit of intro to Webpack. Okay, but we use Webpack to generate our project. So we can see here there's a lot of Webpack related stuff. There's Webpack, there's bundle analyzer, there's the server. The server we run is actually using Webpack. There's merge. Yeah. Okay, so now we have our project scaffolded. Let's actually run it. So after you scaffold it, actually give you some instruction to what to do to run it, right? First you cd into it, do npm install, and then you do npm run dev. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go cd tinyapp. So we're basically going to do a tinyapp clone, use Vue.js, do npm run dev. Wait for it to build. Okay, then it says it's running here, so let's visit this web page. Right, so here we have our basically a page showing up. So that means the server is working. So let's go back to our code, and let's just take a look at what's the generated project and try to make sense of it. So here we have index.html. So let's take a look at this. Okay, nothing amazing, nothing complicated, very simple, just a div. Okay, and it says build file will be auto-injected here. So let's take a look at what gets injected there. So let's do inspect. And you see this is basically index.html, right? But there is this app.js that gets injected, which basically contain. So basically, Webpack builds all the JavaScript and make it one file and then include it in your index.html. Oh, it's too small? Sorry. Okay, so this app.js gets included, which is by Webpack. And if we refresh, we can see all these files. We can see all this code, but obviously it doesn't really make much sense because it's all built by Webpack. But if we go to our source code, so there is a source folder. So let's go inside there. You can see there's a main.js. And okay, so this looks like the entry file for Vue.js. So we see there's some import. We imported an app and then the router. And then here, basically, we're creating a new Vue instance. So each new Vue instance is like a component. It's very similar to a React component. So here it says I'm going to create a Vue component. I'm going to mount it on a element with ID app. Basically, is what we saw here. And this div. And then it's going to say, oh, OK, I'm going to use the router. And the component I'm going to render is the app component. And the template of it is just an app tag with nothing. Yeah.
So this is like a front-end thing?
Yeah, this is a front-end thing. So this is all front-end. So if you can compare this to React, basically. Yeah?
What's the ES lint for? There's ES lint disabled.
Yes. Oh, this is, well, because I didn't even use lint, so this doesn't matter. But if you have used lint, and you don't want it to have errors where, for example, there's some code, you know it's going to break the lint rule. So you don't want it to lint. So you can basically do this. It says for the following code, disable the lint. Don't worry about it, even if I don't follow the style guide.
Yeah, but last time the Cherry app,
Yeah.
the Webpack bundle does have ES lint as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you should be using ESLint for your project. I mean, I'm guessing you guys are working in teams, right? It's not just solo project. So you want to decide on a style to use, and then use the appropriate linker to link it. Otherwise, everybody will be using different style, and your code end up looking like a bunch of thing that hard to understand, right? Someone use, camel case, someone use snake case for variable names is very confusing. Okay, but if there is some code that you just don't want the link to worry about, you can just ESLint disable, and you can also do you can disable specific features of the lint. So here it says disable no new. I'm guessing it's one of the rules of the link. So you can also disable specific rules, or if you just write disable links, so disable everything. Okay. Right, and so basically here that we created a component that have a single child component, which is the app component, and then basically render it onto our div with ID app. So let's take a look at our app component, which is imported.
What's the production tip equals false again?
This you don't have to worry about. This is just a configuration. You can read that in the documentation. But the important thing is this. So this is creating a component and then mount it on the div with ID app. Okay, and let's take a look at the app component, which is this root component use the app component as one of its dependencies. Okay, so we're going to app.view. Okay, so this is where things get a bit interesting. Let me look at Calgary, see if there's any problem. Okay. So when we open the file, right away you notice this file is named .view, not .js, and it's also not .jsx. So the view file is what a view called a single file component. Basically means everything about this component is inside this file. Okay, in React, you usually have different files for a style, for or I guess just style. So style and the JSX, right? So JSX include both the template and the functionality, and then you have CSS in a separate file. Okay, but in Vue, they promote this concept as single file component, meaning you want everything about this component inside this one file, so that if anybody wants to look for a component and they want to modify it, it's very easy to go to modify, right? So they have the template at the very top, and then there's script for the functionality, and then there's also the style for everything style related about this component. Okay, and template in here is basically very much like HTML. So it's not really JSX anymore, and on this inside script is pure JavaScript. Okay, so let's.
And for the styling, it's only CSS. You don't use SCSS.
You can use SCSS as well. So if you install a preprocessor, you can actually do something like this. That basically says, oh, you want to use SCSS? That's fine.
So then, like, what if there's like shared classes with different views? Then how do you put all this stuff?
Yeah, so you can. So one way to do it is you can. So by default, if you don't do anything, this is actually global, which is not good. But you can actually do something called scoped. That basically scope this style to only this component. But if you remove the scope, meaning this is global, you can also use it elsewhere.
But there are going to be times where like not all the styling is going to be in there, right? For that specific component, right? Like if you're using Bootstrap or something, and you modify the class of like a button in a different.
Yeah.
You're using the same button here. Like,
So the best, well, it is going to be there. So if you include Bootstrap as a global CSS, then it's usable in your template.
but if you like modify it in like a different view, and this view is using the same.
Yeah.
Like
So.
include it here as well.
So you can. So there is. It depends on your component tree. So if you have. So for example, this app component is the topmost component. The best practice is just put your global CSS in here, and then everybody can use it. Or if you want to modify Bootstrap a little bit, then you can do it here. Or you can do it for specific component, right? If for this component you want this class to look like a specific way, then you do it in that component instead of the root component. I mean, the whole idea is to encapsulate everything about this component inside this file, instead of having separate files for different components. But let's actually write some code so you get a better idea of what's going on here. So I'm actually going to remove. Okay, so this file is basically what gets rendered, and you see there's this logo, which is, oh, what happened? Oh, let me remove this. Right, this logo is basically this thing, and then there's the router we're using. But I'm going to remove the router first. We'll talk about the router if we have time left. Okay, but first I want to make some. So in React you have state, right? So you can render state onto your template. So here we want to do something very similar, except it's not called state anymore. It's called data. And data basically is a function that returns your state, basically. So let's say we have our title here. Let's call it tiny app. Okay, so we have our state here, and we want to render it onto our template. And the way to do it is do something called the double curly braces, and you just put the name inside there. Okay, and now if I refresh, you can see this tiny app showing up. Right, fairly straightforward. There's also in React you have component mount and stuff like that, which is the lifecycle hooks you can use to execute specific code doing a lifecycle of the component. And Vue.js have something very similar. So let's go to their documentation here. Lifecycle hooks. Okay, so in their documentation, well, the documentation is really awesome. I think it's, well, personally, I think it's better than React. But if you look at this diagram, it basically tell you which lifecycle hook is available. So here we have, they create a new component. You have the before create. There's the created, before mount, and there's mounted, and a bunch of other stuff. So we're going to use mounted. And what I want to do is I want to just to demonstrate that if you change your state, what gets rendered automatically reflects that change. Okay. So in the mounted lifecycle, I'm going to do a set timeout, and I'm going to change my title inside my set timeout. So let's say after 3 seconds, I'm going to change my title here. And the way to change it, because in React, you have to use a special function called setState, right? Vue.js gives you a bit more, less code to write. You can, instead of doing setState, you just do this.title, and you just change the state. Okay, let's make this all cap. Okay, so after 3 seconds, we should see the text get changed to all capital case. Okay, so let's refresh that. Oh, mounted. Yeah, that looks correct. Okay, so refresh, 3, 2, 1. Oh, it didn't change. Damn it. Let's see what's wrong with this set time. Well, let me look at if there are any errors first. Waiting for update signals. Huh. Mounted M. Oh, sure I spelled that correct, right?
Wait, how could you access title like that earlier? Does it automatically run the data?
Run the data? Yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah, that should have worked. Let me do some debugging. Let's first do a console log just to see if my mounted is executed. Okay, so it is. And then set timeout, though, it's not work.
Maybe it's already been 2 seconds when you go back to it.
Let's see if my set timeout is getting triggered. Okay. So 3, 2, 1. So so it is getting triggered. But this title apparently is not setting it correctly.
Does it automatically trigger render?
Yes, it should. I wonder why it's not doing that. Okay, so let me, instead of doing set timeout, why not? Let me just do this. All right, so now it works. So there's some weird issue with set timeout. Huh. Let me restart. When in doubt, try restart.
If you do like arrow function.
Oh, that's a good call.
Yeah.
Yes, I need to do error function. Yes. Yes. Okay, so now it works. Yeah, so it is the error function.
Or you
Nice
bind
try.
it, right?
What?
You bind it.
There's actually no need for binding because, I mean, you could just use the error function. And there's no concept of binding in, well, there is the concept of binding, but binding actually means a different thing in Vue compared to React.
Also, why doesn't it raise an error? Because when you did function this, right, the this within the function is not defined.
Well, this is defined, and title, obviously title is not defined. Basically here you're basically adding a new key to this object. So even if I use, or if you look at, let's just play around with this. And if I do console log this, they actually exist.
It would be the function, right?
It will be the function, actually no.
No, never mind. Yeah.
Right, so this function, this object actually exists.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so then you're basically adding a new key to it, which doesn't
But
do
if
anything.
you console.log that in terminal, it'd be something different. It wouldn't be window anymore. It'd be whatever terminal's referring to.
Yes. No, well, yeah. In your terminal, it's a bit different.
Like if you did no console.log this, it would be the terminal.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. So depending on where your environment is, because this code is front-end code. Front-end code gets run in your browser, so you know this refers to the browsers. In this case, it's the window, I believe. Okay, so every time you change your state, your template automatically reflects that. Okay. Now let's implement your tiny app. So what do you have in your tiny app? So we want to be able to list a bunch of URLs. So let's create a state that represents the URLs, the URL database. So let's say we have URL database. Say it's an array of objects. And there is, each of them have an ID and then the long URL. Okay, so here I'm pretending to have a database. And now I want to actually render my URL database onto my template. And we're going to create an unordered list. And let's say I want each of my URL to be a list item with a, I guess with their ID and their long URL, okay? And in order to do that, we have to use something called directives in Vue.js. What directive does is that it basically modifies the DOM. It's a way to modify the DOM, and you can actually build your own directive if you want to. But Vue.js gives you a very useful built-in directive, and one of them is called v4. And basically, this constructs a loop. Well, actually, I need to put it on the list item. And here, what we want to do is we want to iterate through the URL database. So I'm going to say URL in URL database. And here, I can just put URL.id and URL.long URL.
What does this span do again?
Sorry, say again?
What does this span do again?
Span, well, it's just a tag that doesn't. It's basically, well, I think the correct way to use it is if you have a paragraph, and inside the paragraph you want to just style specific text, then you can use span to wrap it. So basically a partial paragraph, something like that. Yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't have any functionality. It's just a tag that you can use to do styling and do some functionalities. Okay, so now I iterate through the URL database, and right away you can see it's already being iterated through. So I have the two. Actually, let me fix the styling.
Can we implement the link?
Yeah, so I'm going to do that right now. Okay, that looks better. So let's actually implement the link, right? So we want to be able to click on this instead of just have a text. So let's use anchor tag instead then. And in order to make an actual link, we'll have to use href. And in your React, you probably will use something like this, right? You would think probably something like this could probably work. So let's try that. And it actually doesn't. So if you look at the error, here it's basically pointing to that. It says interpolation inside attribute has been removed. Use vbind or the column shorthand instead. Okay, so vbind, so we have to use actually another directive called vbind, which binds variables, which binds states onto the attributes of an element. So this is how we use vbind. And because we're binding, we don't have to use we don't need to use the curly braces anymore. So Vue.js know when you use vbind, the following, what goes inside the quote is basically the state. Okay, so the concept of binding in Vue is different than in React. So binding in Vue means you're just binding to an attribute. Okay, so now we can, well, why do I have two? Let me make this different. Okay, so now if we look at the element, we can see this URL, long URL gets added, right? Okay, so now we have a list of URLs. Let's now allow user to add URLs, right? Let's create a form underneath this unordered list. So in the beginning, there's going to be a lot of overlap to React, where I'm just basically replicating functionality from React. But you will see there's some new stuff that doesn't exist in React very soon. So I'm going to create the form input. So allow user to put in just the long URL. Well, actually, let's allow user to add a name. And then we'll allow user to enter the name and then the long URL. And we'll also need a submit button. So type submit. Okay, let's also render the name as well. Let's not render the ID, let's render the name. Okay, so now we have a form. Now let's talk about how, so right now if I just submit the form, we actually submit it like the traditional way, right? The browser is submitting it. Now what I want to do first, I want to prevent the submit event. I don't want to submit, I don't want the browser to make the request. I don't actually want to send any requests because I'm going to do it directly because I have my database in my front end. So the way to do that is we'll have to bind a listener to the submit event. And the way to do that is to use something called von. And von, we can just say von submit. On submit, create URL. Okay, obviously this function doesn't exist, and we're going to create that.
Well, how do you do that in React?
In React? In React, you have to you do something like this, right? Unclick and then your function, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here right now it's going to complain. My create URL doesn't exist, right? It says handler doesn't exist. Invalid handler for event submit. So we're going to define that. And in order to define methods, so we go into our component code here. So all the methods have to go under this method's name. And here we're going to define, so create URL. And it gets a event. Well, actually, let's not. And we can just do prevent default this way. Okay, let's try that. See if the default gets prevented. So I click submit, nothing happened. Means it worked. Okay. Now, because prevent default is such a common use case, Vue actually give you a shorthand to do it. So Vue give you something called event modifier. So let me actually go to documentation and show you guys. So event modifier. Right, so it says very common need to call it prevent default, so propagating. So basically, when you bind to event, you can directly do something like that. So submit.prevent, which means it does the prevent for you. So here I'm going to change it to .prevent, and because it does it for you, I can just remove that. And now it would work in the same way. If I click submit, nothing happens. Okay. There's a lot of modifier you can use. Other than prevent and the stop propagation thing, you can also check for specific keys. For example, if you just want something to happen with the enter key, you can just do key up.enter, .space. Okay, so very useful thing you can use. You can even set your own modifier, something like that. Okay. Okay, but here, what I actually want to do in my create URL is to get the name and the long URL the user entered, and then save it in my URL database. Okay. Okay. So now the goal is to get the input from the user. Now, how do we do that? Let's. Now, obviously, we can't really just. If you think about it. I mean, if you have jQuery, you can actually just select the tag and then get a value, right? But obviously, we don't have jQuery available. Well, actually, should you use jQuery with React? No?
We use this.
The question is, yeah, should you use jQuery with React?
We didn't use it only there.
Okay. What do you think you should use it? Probably not. But why not, though?
Because they have their own default way of doing things.
Yeah. Because React already give you a way to modify the DOM, right? And jQuery is kind of, I mean, it was the way to modify the DOM, but now there's React and Vue, all these different libraries you can use. So obviously we can't just select the input tag, right? But the way to do it is you can, well, in React, what you would do is you would say, you will bind a event listener onto here, right? So let's say vbind. I think it's key up, and you would do something like handle name change. And let's do that. Let's actually create this method. Right, and you would initialize your name to be empty first, and then when user types something, you would do this. This is basically changing the state. So name.e. I believe target.value. Okay, let me double check this. I'll do a console log. Okay, so I'm using this handler. So every time someone types something, this function gets called, and which in turn change the state, which is the name. Okay, let me refresh this. And okay, so I do get the correct value. Okay, and you would do the same with the long URL. Okay, I think this is how you guys did it in your chatty app, right? Is it not? Remind me if this is.
Way too long.
It's way too long? Well, how did you guys do it?
It's been way too long.
Oh, it's been way too long. Okay, that's fine. But I believe this is how you did it in your chatty app.
Yeah, pretty much.
Handle on URL change. So I'm going to copy that as well. So handle long URL change. Okay, and that should now work, and I should be able to retrieve the name that the user entered and the long URL that the user entered. Did I initialize the long URL? No? Okay, so let me do that. Okay, so let's try that. So when I click submit, I should be able to see the stuff that the user entered. Click on submit, and I do see that. Okay. Now let me change the event real quick here. So instead of using key up, there's a special event in Vue called input, which is very similar to key up, but I'm going to use that for now, and I'm going to explain that later on. So it should still work the same way. Okay, so I get the value. Okay, now we have the name and the long URL. We can just add it to our database, right? Our database is just an array. We can just append to it. So let's do that. So this .url database. Well, actually, let's create an object first. The new URL object. And this .long URL. Actually, we need an ID as well. Let's say next ID is 3. Okay, and then I'm going to increment ID. Okay, and then I'm going to push this object into my URL database. And if everything works, what I expect to see is this new URL show. Whoa, what's going on? What I expect to see is this new URL show up on my list. Because let's read this error. This is a reserved word. Last one doesn't have a key in the object. Oh, well, you guys are good. Catching all my errors. All right, hopefully that works now. Oh, no errors. Let's try that. Let's add GitHub. Let's click submit, and it works. Okay, so you guys added. So unlike React, where you have to do set states, here you can just do push, and it just shows up. Right? Now, after I click submit, I actually want to clear the input and then allow user to enter new stuff. Right? So how would I do that? Which one? Well, if you think about it, I can't do e here, right? Because this e.target doesn't actually refer to the input tag, because this was the submit event, which is emitted by the form. So I can't really just do e.target.clear or whatever.
You have to go to elements and then target that from that form.
Right, right. But I don't even have jQuery available. How do I even target that form? Well, yeah. Well, I mean, you could brute force your way and use vanilla.
It works,
yeah, it works. But here's a better way. And this is probably how you did it in your React app, right? No, I'm saying the way I'm going to do it, not the brute force way. So I'm going to bind my state onto the value attribute. And bind my long URL here. Okay, so here I'm listening for the input event. When it changes, I change the state, and I also bind my state into the value attribute, so that the value stays the same whenever I change the state, okay, which is the name and long URL I defined right here. Okay, and after I push it in, what I can do is I can just set the state to empty. Okay, and it should just reflect that, because I binded my state to the value attribute, right? Okay, so let's try that. I click submit, and it works. Okay, so basically, if you want to have control over the value, then you bind it to your state, and then whenever you change the state, the value, whatever attribute you bind to, change directly. Okay, now all these seems very inconvenient, right? So right now I only have 2 input fields. What if I have like 40, right? And do I have to define a handler for each of the inputs, and then that will be very inconvenient. Now Vue give you a better way to do it. Basically, it's a syntax sugar of doing these 2 things in one line, in one go. So called V model. And I can just give it the state I want to bind to. Okay, so basically these vModel does two things. First, you create this event handler, and then whenever the input change, it just change the state of name. Okay, so let's see how this works. So I'm going to remove that, and let me just render the name on top of it to show you guys. Okay, now when I type something, you see this model gets changed directly. Okay, in React, I don't think can do something like this. There's only one-way data binding, right? So you can, well, this is still one way, but it gives you a syntax sugar. In React, you have to do this manually, and then you have to handle the state change yourself. But Vue give you a way to do like to simulate two-way data binding. So
for your on input, it's listening for every time you input something, right?
Yes.
The state changes, and you're always calling in that function.
No, not when the state changes. On input is this input event is emitted by the input tag. At this point, there's no, when I type something, the state doesn't change. So if I don't do this, or state doesn't change automatically, right? It's changing your handler, right? It's you're manually changing it. This is changing the state, right? But if you use vModel, it actually does the state, just the state change for you. Okay, that's why you get this. That's why when you type something, the state changes automatically, even though you didn't even give it any event handler. Okay, now I can remove this event handler right here. And I can do the same for my lawn URL. I can just do vModel, lawn URL, and I can remove this extra function. Okay, so now everything should work still the same. So let me remove that. And if I type some stuff, I click submit, it works, and it also clears my input. Okay. Very straightforward. And now let's do edit. Okay, so we want to be able to, well, first of all, let's create an edit button for each of our URL. I'm going to use an anchor tag. Well, actually, let's use a button. Type button. Okay, so what I wanted to achieve is that when I click edit, my this form gets pre-filled with the URL's information, and I can edit it, I can submit, and then you would update instead of adding step to it. And once I click edit, I can also cancel it if I want. So if I click edit, there should be a cancel button showing up here. And if I click cancel, it basically cancels the edit. Okay. Let's implement that cancel button. Oh, actually, no. Let's implement pre-filling this form. When I click edit, it should pre-fill the form with the URL I want to edit. Okay, let's. We have our button, so let's actually bind an event to it. Oh, actually, there's a shorthand. So because Vyond is used so often, there's a shorthand for Vyond, which is just the @ sign. And there's also a shorthand for vbind because it's used so often, you can just omit it. And this is just vbind. And now let's listen for this click of this edit button. So we're going to say, when clicked, I'm going to call this method called edit, and then pass in the URL. Okay, and now I'm going to define this edit method. Okay, this edit method gets a URL, and what it does is that it should pre-fill the form. So how do I pre-fill the form? From
Access the variable.
yeah, access the state, right? So I can just set the state. You do have to write equal sign. So URL.lawn URL. Okay, and let me try this. I click on edit, right, and it shows up. So that's cool. Now let's have this cancel button showing up here, so that if I click on cancel, they actually can cancel the edit. Let's go to our template. Let's add an extra button here. Cancel.
But you only want that to show up when
You're right. I only want, so now it shows up. It doesn't matter. It always shows up. So let's make it conditionally show up. So you can use a directive called vIf, very reasonably named. And let's check for some, well, actually we can't check for name or long URL. Because if we check for name, then if user just enters something, it actually also shows up, which is not good. So what would be the solution here? You guys understand why I can't just use that? Right? If I use that, kind of worked. But if I refresh the page, I'm just adding a URL. That doesn't make sense, right? So how do I solve that? Well, first of all, do you guys get why it doesn't make sense?
Yes, well, you can check if it's in the database.
Yeah, I have to check whether it's in the database.
That's probably the best check.
But how do I know whether it's in the database? Well, actually, we could just well, instead of using name, let's say there is this. Let's create an ID state, right? So if when we're creating a URL, we're actually using this.next ID, right? Meaning, well, user can't really enter the ID. You generate the ID, right? When we do edit, let's actually assign the ID.
Isn't ID 0?
I started at 1. Well, you can. Well, here for demo, you can decide which one. If you want to start at 0, you can start at 100 or whatever.
Just because it's in string, it's an empty string, and you have integer for all the other ones.
Oh, true. Let's do -1. Well, actually, let's do 0. Actually, I don't even remember. Is 0 false in JavaScript? I think so. Hopefully it is. I'm using too many languages. I forget which one. Okay, so it doesn't show up. So 0 is false. Okay, so let's click on. Oh, ID is not defined. What happened here? Did I miss this? Oh, I have to URL.id. There we go. Okay, so let's click on edit. That works. Let's also implement this cancel. So right now cancel doesn't do anything. So let's make it listen to the click event. Click. Let's say cancel edit. And let's implement this method, cancel edit.
So the at sign is like on click and it's like what else is it?
In React?
Yeah, no, in Vue, when you put the at sign.
At sign means means V on.
Yeah, sorry.
Basically,
It's the same as on click.
yeah, it's basically saying yeah. When clicked, do that. So it's listening, spawning event handler to that specific event.
Like in React, it would be on click.
Yeah, in React it would be on click. Yes.
Wait, and the vIf is like it'll display only if that's true.
Yeah. So vIf is a condition. Basically, only display this element, the element that have the vIf on it. If this is false, then this doesn't even appear in the DOM. If this is true, then this appear in the DOM. Okay. Cancel edit. So I'm going to say, well, if it's canceled, set this back to 0, and set everything to empty. Okay. Let's try that. I click on edit, and I click on cancel, and the button disappear, and I can now enter new stuff. Okay.
It's pretty much tiny out.
That's well, yeah. Well, we haven't implemented the edit yet. well, this is different, right? This is the way you guys did it in the very first few weeks. It's not really using any front end stuff. It's just back end. It's just different ways to do it. So let's implement the edit. Right now, if I click on edit and I click on submit, it actually creates a new one, right? Because our submit, it only does create, right? Now let's change this. So instead of calling it create URL, it could be create or update. So let's rename this to just Let's just name this submit instead. Okay, and in here we're going to change it. We're going to change the condition so that we're going to add a condition so that if it's edit, we actually update the existing one. If it's create, then we create it. And how should we check whether it's creating or updating? Or which state do we check?
The ID.
Sorry?
The ID.
The ID, yes. Let's check the ID. So if this.id. So if there's an existing ID, that means it's updating. If not, then we are creating. So I'm going to copy paste the create code in the else clause. Okay, so now let's test this. If it is edit, then it shouldn't do anything when I click submit. All right, it works. And if I cancel and if I try to create again, should the create still work? Okay, perfect. Now let's implement this edit. How should we do this? So we have an array, so we need to find, well actually, so that we need to find the object based on the ID, and then we change that based on the state we currently have. So let's do that. So how should we find the ID? Let's use for each. What?
No.
Let's do target URL. Well, actually no. Let's do let. And let's do a for each here. So let's dot URL database for each URL. Target URL is, well actually we need to so have the if condition here, if this.id is equal to URL.id, then we have that. And let's just make sure this loop works correctly. Okay, so let's click on edit, let's click on submit. Okay, so that is that one. If I do the Facebook one, it should be ID2. All right, so that worked. And notice this object though, it's an observer object, so it's a special object built by Vue.js. So it's not an ordinary object. And then that's just the way they make this reactivity work. But you can treat it as an ordinary object. Okay. So we have the target URL. Now we can just update it. So target URL dot name is this dot name, and then target URL dot long URL is this dot long URL. And we also want to clear that input, and we also want to reset the ID to 0. Okay, so since we're going to clear this, even if we're creating, so we're going to make that outside the if statement. Okay, so if there's an ID, we find the target URL, we update it, cancel the edit mode, and then clear the form. Cool. Let's see if this works.
We don't write semicolons?
Okay, so that's actually a good question. We don't, well, depends on your style. Okay, so semicolon is actually not required by JavaScript, but there is some caveat. So if you follow style, which is the style I follow, it's the standard JavaScript style guide. And if I follow this style guide, then let me go to the GitHub version. Then it says, if you're following this, no semicolon. So it says no semicolon. Okay? But if you're following the Airbnb style guide, which is, I think it's the one that's been taught to you guys, which requires the semicolon, then you should use the semicolon. But you can pick the style you want to use. So if you look at the Airbnb style guide, then all their examples have semicolons. Then you should use it. But if you look at this one, where's the examples?
So you just use like different linters?
Yeah, you will use different linters. I mean, obviously you don't have to use linters, but it is a good practice to use linters because otherwise, someone use semicolon, someone doesn't. And that's just it's just not good. Okay, if you're not going to use it, then just don't use it for everything.
And if you go to a company, they'll make you use it one certain.
Yes. If you go to a company, they will, well, depending if they're following group practice, most companies, they require you to lint. Some of them even do, you can't, if you fail your lint, you can't even commit. So that is, it's hard requirement. So you should use lint. That's a good practice. Yeah, but if you don't use semicolon, there's some caveat you should need to know, is you can't start your code with. They used to have examples here. There's some special cases where if you omit semicolons, there could be problems. I guess more details. Maybe it's in here. Okay, so you cannot start your line with these. Otherwise, your code will behave very weirdly. Okay.
Well, it makes sense though.
Yeah, if you're okay with that, if you have that in mind, then you can omit your semicolon, right? So this is okay. But yeah, so if you follow their style guide, they're saying avoid using semicolon at all. So I'm following that style, so that's why I can omit my semicolons. But okay, so where are we with the functionalities? So edit, I think. Well, let me just test. Let's check if edit works. Just add an S there. Okay, so it works. If I click on edit, click on cancel, hopefully I can still create. I can. If I edit again, click on submit. Right, so it all works perfect. Any questions so far? No?
So what other logic do you do in the HTML? So you showed us for and if, like that's the only way to implement like that logic, right? Logic in general.
The right way.
Right?
Well, it's definitely not the only way. You can even implement your own directive if you want to. But here I think that.
There's no like custom. So if you were to do like an if and else statement, like how would you do that?
Oh, else? Well, there is an else directive. You can actually.
How does it know to attach it to that if? Oh,
How does it know? Well, let me show you this first. Let's just say this is else.
also,
and-
do you have comments in here? Because JSX you can have comments.
Comments inside your HTML?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because you can just do
It's just HTML.
just HTML comments. Well, actually, I believe so. Let me test that. Yeah. So let me look at the. See if that still. Oh, I think it gets stripped out because of Webpack. But you can have it here. It doesn't break your code. So, well, that's the point for comments, anyways. Yeah. So I can use velse, and now the else shows up. And if I click on edit, the cancel shows up. Okay. If you want to use that, you can use that. There's a lot more. I don't think that's all the built-in directive. There's a few more built-in directive you can use. Obviously just read documentation and they give you a lot of details. Their documentation is really good. You can also implement your own directive. But for now, let's. Any other questions? After the break, I'm going to show you guys how to create components. Right now, we just have one component. Yeah.
So in your work, when you don't understand documentation, what do you do?
When I don't understand documentation, I just play around with the code and just figure out how it works, basically. Or if you look into, if it still doesn't work, if you still doesn't understand, then I will look into the source code. But most of the time, I don't need to do that. Yeah. Okay, if no question, let's take a break. Let's come back at 10:20.
Is Vue.js what you use at your work?
Yeah, if I have the choice, I would choose Vue.js. Yeah, because I like the style better, and not a big fan of JSX, like I said. So.
So you don't have Facebook?
I don't want Facebook. Yeah. Well, there was a big problem with their with the license with React. I think they have since fixed it. But like a few months ago, there was a big news where a bigger company are starting to give up on React because their license have some problem with patents and stuff. But I think they've since fixed it. So now React is still the most popular one. Sure. And React has such a large ecosystem. Like you can also do like React Native and stuff like that to build mobile apps. The Vue doesn't really give you any of that. It's mostly just for web. Yeah, definitely. There's more job for hiring React, and especially bigger companies usually bigger company usually use React. But nowadays I see a lot of startups they choose Vue.js more, just because Vue I think is easier to learn. React is more a steep learning curve because you have to understand JSX, which is a whole new thing. Well, that's good. That's good. So I have no experience with React Native, but I mean, it's named React Native. I don't think you can use Vue. Yeah. But I think there's other ways. If you want to build mobile app using Vue, I think there's other ways. Before React Native, there's something called a PhoneGap or Cordova or whatever. I think that's basically running a web browser inside your phone, inside your app. So I think if you use that, you can probably use Vue. I don't know. I think you could. I think if you use like Cordova, PhoneGap or whatever those things, I think they provide the API for you to call into native functionalities like cameras and stuff. But I have never tried it myself, so I'm not 100% sure. But I'm sure there's ways to do it. But I think React Native is so dominant nowadays. It's probably just better to go React Native. I heard it's a lot faster, a lot smoother. Hey, good. How are you? Oh, sure. Well, you can, I guess, after they come back from break. So 10:20 is where.
Or I can even do it at the end.
Yeah, sure. Whatever works.
Let's do end of class.
Okay.
So maybe when you're just wrapping up, just keep them in here.
Okay.
And then,
You'll be outside, and I'll just call
I'll
you.
just be at the
Okay.
office, yeah.
Sure.
Cool.
Sure. Yeah. Jeremy might know. No. Oh, okay. What project are you guys building? Oh, okay. Oh yeah. Maybe a tough one, I think. I mean, I have not done anything with streaming, so not sure how to do that. Well, I'm sure. I think there should be library for that. I think because it's not good. I mean, I guess you don't have to. Well, what's not good about it? It's just its signal is not like it doesn't show up or it's broken. Oh. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Then guess you might probably want to find an alternative to WebRTC because I'm sure there's a solution to it because there's streaming conferences app. There's a lot of conferences app. And I mean, if it's the underlying technology, then well, it's not really your fault that it doesn't work, right? I think there might be even like third-party services, like APIs you can use that provide like streaming stuff. For what? For what? I think so. I mean, whatever you can think of, I think there's already something exists. So, um, using Flush, yeah, that's I think that's probably what most of the companies are using. What is the best live streaming video API? Yeah, just a brief search. There's vPlay and live stream API. Yeah, I guess just look into maybe there's API already exists and you can use that if you want to. Okay. Okay, let's do more view stuff. So I just checked the number of stars. It looks like Vue actually passed it React. Yeah, so Vue now have like 105,000 stars. React only have 104,000. So that means it's growing really quickly.
When did you get developed or released?
I think so. Yeah, so 1 year after React. Yeah. So it's doing really well.
What were the other ones you had on that thing?
Yeah, so these are the ones that I have personally used.
Meteor. I used Meteor before.
Oh, really?
Just playing around with it. I didn't understand what I was doing.
Yeah, Meteor it's kind of a different game because it's both backend and frontend. is something called isomorphic JavaScript, where you use the same code base for both backend and front end. So it's a different concept. I mean, I tried it, but not a big fan of it because I'm not a big fan of JavaScript for backend. So, and there's Angular, which is kind of the most popular, which is the framework that kind of started this whole SPA framework. And then there's Angular 2. Actually, no, they're on Angular 5 now, which is. But Angular, I think, is geared more toward enterprise stuff. It's also pretty deep learning curve, I think. I mean, I haven't used Angular. I used Angular 1 a lot before, but they have a very big transition from 1 to 2, where you have to rewrite all your code, which is a big pain in the ass. And since then, I have stopped using Angular.
Do any mobile?
Not mobile app. I mean, I don't do mobile development.
Okay.
I mean, you have to learn a different tool set for mobile, like Swift and Objective-C and stuff.
Even if you're using native more.
I mean, you could use React Native.
Right.
That could work. But personally, I have no experience with that.
Yeah.
But I think it's very it should be straightforward if you use React. It basically, I think it basically gives you some native APIs you can call into, like cameras and stuff, and then you can just use that. Okay, let's talk more about Vue. Let me go back to here. So let's refactor our code a little bit. So right now, when I edit, I need to I need to do all these assignments. Wouldn't it be nice if I can just have an object that have all these state? And if I can do that, so your state can actually be an object. So I can just, instead of creating all these as separate states, I can put them into a single object. Okay, and inside my form, so instead of directly binding that state, I can now bind to my object. I call it URL object, right? Okay, URL object, yes. And now I should get a bunch of errors. But let's fix this. Well, actually, I know what's going on. So I have changed my state. Instead of having them on the top level, I changed them on to having this object, and then this object have name and URLs. So I'm going to change my create as well. So in my creation, I don't need to create this new object anymore, because when user input stuff, my URL object state already gets updated. So I could just do this URL object dot. I just need to set the ID. And that should make it work. And let me fix the if statement here. I want to check for your object.id. Okay, and that should fix the error. Okay. Now I want to test if my creation still work. Okay. So just I'm using this URL object. My model bind to URL object. And when I create, I also use URL object. And basically now I just push this URL object into it. And afterwards, I can just reset name empty, long URL is also empty. All right, that should, so now I refactor a little bit and my creation still work. So let's try create something and it still works. Okay, now let's fix our edit. So our edit takes in the URL, and now because we don't have all these states, our states are nested on the URL object. So what we need to do is we can just do URL object equal to URL. Okay, so and when we cancel, we just reset to empty like here. Okay, does that make sense? It's just some refactoring, nothing special. Functionality doesn't change. Okay, so let me try see if this edit is refactored properly. Oh, that's not good. Okay, so this is not good because I don't want to add it to actually appear before I click submit. So let's. If I click cancel, oh yeah, that's even worse. Okay. Well, the reason, so the reason that's happening is because when we edit, we're passing in the URL object directly from the database, right? So that's the same instance. And when we assign that instance to our URL object, which means we're not directly, when user enters something, we're directly changing the state, which is not good. Well, which works, but it's not what we want. So instead of that, let's clone this object instead, so that we don't change the database directly. And one way to clone it is to use object.assign. Do you guys know what this does? What object.assign does? It concatenates. Yeah, so basically it merges two objects. And if I give it an empty object, the first one, then basically kind of do a shallow clone of the second object.
Do you know why if we do like empty object plus empty object it returns a string?
No, I don't know why, and I don't think it should work that way.
Because this is the proper way of doing it, but when you try the object plus the object to return a string quotation.
Yeah, it's no, it's a feature of JavaScript. Yeah, it should be a bug, but I mean, JavaScript is used by so many browsers and stuff. You can't really just change something. Maybe in ES6 or ES7, then maybe they will fix that. But for now, it is just the way it is. And if you want to merge it, this is kind of the way you do it. Okay, so that should kind of fix that. Let's test that. So click on edit, type in something. Okay, so that works. Let's see if submit works. Oh crap! So submit broke. So let's go to our submit function. Okay, so we need to, instead of checking for this.id, we need to check for this.url object ID. Okay, and when we are editing, we need to compare for this one instead. And the rest, okay, then I can even remove that because this line already takes care of setting the ID to 0. Okay, that should work. Okay, let's try it. Oh, let's edit. Oh no. Okay, let's debug this. Okay, so this the URL, the ID, that's correct. Target URL. Okay, so let's console log target URL. Oh, actually, I think I already know what's going on. So here, this.name doesn't exist anymore, right? So we actually need to set it to this.URL object.name. Okay, now it should work. Go on, edit. Submit. Yay, now it works. Okay. So what about the other field? Okay, yeah, let's test this thoroughly. .com, submit. All right, so it works. Any questions? All right, so basically I just refactored and then just make, instead of, right, just having this as the primary object for the form. All good? All right, now let's do some more refactoring. Let's create a component. So right now we have this root component called app. What we want to do is let's refactor each LI to be its own component. Meaning we're going to create a component named, probably named this name URL item. Okay, so its purpose is for displaying a URL object in its proper form. And we want to pass in, so how we want to use it is we want to pass in the URL object. So we want to iterate through this database as well. But we don't want to do our template like inside here. we just want our URL item to handle the template, and we just pass in the necessary information, which in this case is the URL, which is equals to the URL. Okay, and the URL item as a component should understand that they're rendering a URL, and it should render like that. But as our parent component, we don't have to worry about the detail of that template. Okay, so let's go create this component. So right now, obviously, if I refresh, it doesn't work because it doesn't know what URL item is. Right? So it says, did you register that component? Well, no. So let's register now. And the way to create components. So the scaffolding project already give you a folder called components, and that is where your component should go. So I'm going to create a new component named URL item.view. And I'm going to copy paste this in there, and I'm going to remove the parts I don't need. So all I need is this list item. So I'm going to remove everything else. And each URL item represents a single URL, which means I don't need the for loop anymore. So I'm going to name this URL item. And I don't think I need data, so I'm going to remove that. I don't need mounted. In fact, I don't think I even need much of this method. Let me remove this first. Remove all the style. Okay, and now let's just test this. I create this component, and the way to use component is to import it. So I'm going to import URL item from components URL item. Okay, and when I import it, I have to define that my app component depends on URL item. So what I do is I define a components key, and then in there I can just put my URL item inside it. This basically specifies the dependency, and that way I can use it inside my template. Okay, if I don't do that, then my app still doesn't understand what URL item is. So I have to define the dependencies here. And notice the name, even though when you're in your code is this title case, but in your template you can use this dash case. Okay, and it understands that. So let's do a refresh. There's some errors. Let's see what the errors is. Property or method URL is not defined on instance, but referenced in render. Oh, I see. Okay. So it's saying, it's pointing to this URL item. There's some errors. Let's go inside there. And the error says, property or method URL is not defined. Okay, what that means is we're trying to access a URL, but it's not defined in my URL item component, which makes sense. But what I want to do is I want to be able to pass in props from my app component to my URL item component. Okay, and in order to do that, I can define a props attribute, a props key inside my component. Inside here, I can just say, oh, actually, let's go to the documentation. View this props. Okay, there are different ways to define props. The most simple way is you can just be an array, and you just pass in the name you want it to be the props. Or you can actually specify more specific what kind of props it accepts. Like, is it a string, is it a number, or is it a Boolean? Or you can even go like this. You can say, well, this prop is type string and it's required, and if you don't pass it, I'm going to throw an error. Or you can say, well, it can be a string, or it can be a number, or you can even do validations on this props, or you can even give defaults to these props. Okay, so there is many different ways you can define it. But for this demo, I'm going to just use this. So So I'm just going to check the type, and that's it. So this component accepts a URL prop, and it must be, well, actually, its type is an object, and it's required. Okay. If you don't give me a URL, I don't know what to render, and I'm going to throw an error, and you have to fix it. Okay, so now we define our props. And our binding should now works. So note this is the name. So if you define your props as URL, then when you use it, you have to use the exact name here. Yeah?
When we did React, it was like if we pass the data and the functions down, right?
Yes.
So then, like when you pass the function down to the child component, did it also pass the state automatically, or you have to pass that separately?
The state doesn't get passed.
The state, but you can pass it separately though.
Yeah, you can pass it separately if you want to.
And then
Yeah.
the action from the child triggers the function and then modifies the data.
Yeah. So that's basically how React does it. And it's very similar in Vue. The data down and action up. Okay. So here I'm passing the data, right? URL is the data. I'm passing it down to my child component so that it can render it. And let's just try this. Let's see if it works. What's going on here? Oh, this is the v4 thing. Okay, so in React, you have, whenever you do loops, you have to define a unique key. So Vue requires you to do the same. Whenever you use v4, you need to do explicit keys. So I'm going to do that. And I noticed it actually worked, right? So they actually rendered two sets of data. So I'm going to remove the list item now. I'm going to remove this now. And if you go to, if you see this error, then you can go to the documentation and see why. But the way to fix it is just provide the key to be a unique key, and that's it. Okay, and that should fix this. Well, it's not really an error, it's just a warning. Okay, so now the URL shows up, but there's a problem. Now if we click on edit, it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because the event is emitted by the button inside the child component, but then this edit function, we don't have it in our child component. It's actually inside our parent component. Now, inside, if you're using React, you will probably pass in the edit as a function, and then your child component will actually call that function. But in Vue, you can actually emit your own event. So that's what we're going to do. So inside here, we're going to define, instead of we call edit, we're going to say clicked. Actually, no. Let's just call it edit. And then we're going to define this edit. And actually, it doesn't have to accept anything because we know which URL it is. And here we can emit an event. Let's call this edit event. And with this event, I'm going to also emit a data, called this.url. Okay, so basically what this does is that when a user clicks on this button, it's going to call this function. And this function is going to emit an event called edit. And inside my parent component, I can actually listen for that event. So I'm going to say at edit, I'm going to do edit. Actually, let me change the name, just make it less confusing. Let's say this is onEdit. Right, so onEdit is the function I define in my in my child component, and which emits a edit event. This is your custom event. You can make your own event in Vue. And your parent component will listen for this event emitted by by the child component, and we call this edit function, which is the function we originally defined here. Okay. Now let's see if this works. So I click edit. Right. So now it works. So the event was triggered by the child component, and child component also emits its own event, and our parent handled the child component's event. Okay. And now we also do cancel. That still works. Let's try if our edit also works. Yeah. That also works. And if I cancel it and then create a new one, that also works. Okay.
Can you show us that again? Sorry. Like how it goes through
The event? how the event works? Okay, so let's do some console logging. So this is running child event handler. And this is, let me go to here.
That emit thing was just.
This emit thing is, well, this emit method is provided by Vue. And what it does is basically it emits an event, okay? And if so here, this is my child component. I have a button, and I'm listening for a native event called clicked. And if that event gets emitted, I'm going to trigger this function. And inside this function, I'm going to emit my own custom event named edit. I can name it whatever I want, okay? I can name it test. But if I name it test, I will have to use it. I have to listen for this test event, right? But I'm gonna.
So it emits it to all components or just parent?
It emits only to the parent. Well, only in the parent you can listen to event. If there's other component, for example, if there's, let's say there's a test component here, but this test component doesn't even use URL item. How can you listen to it, right? You can't really listen to it. So this emits to whatever component is using it, right? Only inside here, when you're using it, you can listen for its event. And now I'm listening for the edit event of this URL item component. And when that event gets emitted, I'm going to call the edit function, which I defined here.
So basically all subcomponents will only have like emitters. They'll never actually have like an actual modifying function.
I would say it depends on the use case. If you could use event, then the best practice for Vue is to use event. So basically, so data down, events up. But there might be cases where using event might not work. Although I can't think of an example right now. But there is some cases that you do want to pass a function down instead of just emitting event, so that the children component actually calls the parent's function. But in most cases, use event is better. Okay, I mean it's easier, and they also, you don't have to, if you're defining a function, then you have to actually in your documentation you have to say, well, what kind of function you should define. But if it's just events, then you don't have to worry about it. Just look at the name and just use that name. Okay, any question on this part? No. Let's see what else we want to do. Oh, let's do. Well, actually, I'll give you guys a choice. Do you guys want to see? CSS. Oh, CSS, right? Okay, yeah. Let's do CSS. Let's show this CSS thing. Let's say in my URL item, I want my. Let's say I want my button to be super big. Oh, I don't think I can do that. My CSS skill is not very good. There's a lot of CSS is very. I mean, even for me, it's hard because there's a lot of stuff that doesn't behave the way that we expect, and sometimes you just have to play around with it to figure out.
Who's good at that?
I don't know who's good at that. Joe, yeah, Joe probably is better than that. Yeah, so I'm not particularly good at CSS. But I want to show you guys how the style works for the single app component. So let's say I want my button to be super big here. Let's say let's change the font size to be 50 pixel. Well, actually 50 is too big. Let's do 24. Okay, notice now, not just my child component's button gets big, my parent component also gets big. But if I add this sculpted thing, notice only my child component CSS gets changed. My parent component doesn't get affected. So this is a very good way to scope your style. But if you want to have common ones, you can just omit the scope and they will be applied globally. There's also some other attributes, some other features. Let's talk about computed property a little bit. So there's also something called computed properties, meaning you can actually you can define properties that depends on other properties. So let's say let's just use test. And my test property, actually no, let me not do the example here. Let's go to my parent component. Let's use this title to do the example. Let's say I have a computed properties, and the title is going to be, define new title. And this property is always going to be title plus, I don't know, test. Let's do that. And let's render this new title. Okay, so this new title then is going to depend on this .title, and whenever this .title change, new property is going to also reflect that change. Okay. Let's do and how come it doesn't display? Computed. Let me go to documentation. Maybe I defined this wrong. So let's go to computed properties. Alright, so their example is, if you want to clean up a message, you can do computed properties. So computed, reverse the message. So I think I defined it the correct way. New title. Oh, I didn't return. Yeah, I always forgot. So I used to use a function, a programming language that doesn't require return. So see now, whenever your title changes, this computer property also changes. Okay, so basically, it's a way for you to define state that depends on other states, and you can use it to do rendering. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I can also show the router. Do you guys want to see the router? I mean, yeah?
Yeah.
All right, so let's play around with the router, and I'm going to put back in my router. Actually, there is, so before the router, there is a Chrome plugin that can help you see your component tree. So if you look at our component tree here, we have our root component, which was created inside our main.js. So this is the root component. And our app component, which we just wrote, and then our URL item component. Okay, so it's very good. It's very useful for debugging. Now let's add our router. So router requires you to use a component called router view. Is it route view or router view? I forgot. But let's try see if it's router view. Okay, apparently it's not router view. Maybe it's route view. Oh, still not route view. Let me remove that for now. Router view. Wait, so it is router view. Okay, so basically, so let me save this in a different file. Let's make this a div. I still want my title here. Okay, so I'm modifying my app component. And in my app component, I just have a div, a title, and then I have this router view. So what router view does is that it's a component provided by the router, and basically the router would use this component to decide to render depending on the route we're in. Okay, and there is so if we go to the router folder, there's index.js. If we look at this, basically it gives you a way to map path to specific components. Okay, so right now because we're on the root path, there's some errors here. Okay, so right now the root path maps to the component hello world. Okay, so if we look at our, so right now we're on our root path, and if we go to our elements, well, let's go to the view plugin. We can see there's a root component, there is our app, and under our app, there is this router view. This router view right now renders hello world because we're on the root path, defined by our route mapping in our route index.js. Okay. Now I want to define a different route. Let's say if now I visit /urls, I want it to go to, let's create a new component called home. Right now it doesn't exist, but we're going to create it. So let's say home, and it's home. I'm going to go inside my component. I'm going to create this new component called home.view. Okay. I'm going to copy paste my going to copy paste my previous app component, because now my app component is going to act as just a dummy component, just have a router view to show the route. So I'm going to put all the previous logic from my app component to this home component, this new component I'm going to create. And this one would have the previous template we have. Okay, and this home component uses the URL item and do all the work for us. And our app component is going to say, forget about all the functionalities. I'm going to remove everything. And you're just going to be a dummy component. They just have this router view. Remove the style as well. Okay, so there's some error. Let's see what error we get. Cannot resolve. Okay, let's see what's going on. So here the error says cannot resolve component /URL item. That's because we're now inside our home component and our path is different. So we can just use that instead. Property or method title is not defined on our app component. So let's go fix that. Okay, let's still create a. Actually, forget about that. I'm just going to remove this. Okay, so now we refactor a little bit. Our app component right now doesn't do anything, and it renders, and the route renders based on the path. So now if we go to /urls, we can see our app here, and we can see our home component gets rendered onto router view, which is inside app. Okay, and now we actually want to make a link so that if we go to our home, go to our hello world component, there should be a link here that says, go to home page or whatever. Okay, so let's do that. And actually, let's just do it in our home component instead, in our app component. Okay, so our app component in our home page, in our root path right now renders the hello world component, which is provided by our scaffolding. But we're going to add a link here. So let's say go to /urls. Say view URLs. Huh, this might not work. Okay, let me quickly fix this. So by default, when you use your router, you see this hashtag that gets added. Even if I remove it, it gets automatically added. So this is a way to make a single app application work in older browsers. So it's mostly for backward compatibilities. But I want to remove this. So the way to do that is to specify the mode for our router. Where's my router? So if you change the mode to history, now this hashtag can go away. Okay, so now we're good. Now if I click on view URLs, you actually go to this page. But this is not actually the correct way to do it, even though it works. Because when we look at our network requests, if you look at our network requests, when we go to view URLs, everything gets reloaded, right? That's not really how you do it with single page application. You don't want to reload anything. The way to do it is you can't really use, you shouldn't be using directly an anchor tag. You should use something provided by the router. So if you go to their documentation, so view router, and there is getting started. And if you look at the example here, we should be using something called router-link. So we're going to use that. Like Rails? Yeah, a little bit similar. And here you can provide the URL. And basically, it still renders an anchor tag, except it does some magical things for you, so that when you click on this, it doesn't reload the entire page, right? It basically swap out the component, and then use the current component for the router view. I notice there's no HTTP request at all. Okay, so the big thing, this entire thing is just running our browser, and it's not making extra requests. Okay, any question on the router? I mean, it's not really nothing complicated. Just use it and read the documentation, and it's fairly straightforward. Any other question for Vue?
So I guess like the file structure is just like a lot more condensed than like a React project, I guess.
A lot more condensed.
You only have like one file per component.
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't say it's more condensed. I mean, even for your React, you would have at least one file for your. Well,
You'd have like two, right?
yeah, that's true. Well, actually, no. You could have all your CSS inside of just one giant CSS, right? In that case, I mean, the number of files, I don't think it matters that much. But the way you structure it, I mean, you can, like here, it's just the folder. The way you structure it is by the scaffolding. You can actually structure it any way you want. You can rename this component to call it, test or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's unlike Rails where you kind of have to follow their structure. But Vue give you a bit more flexibilities. But a warning for you guys is that if you guys want to use this for your final project, do know that not all the mentors know about Vue.js, but most mentors know about React. So just be careful with that. So you might, if you want to use this for a final project, you might have less help available. But yeah, other than that, if you're feeling adventurous, feel free to use Vue.js for your final project. Okay, that's it for today then. Yeah. Functional component. What do you mean by functional component? Yeah. Oh shoot, I forgot. Yeah, sorry. I forgot this announcement. You guys, yeah.